This is so loud. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Hall, the director of the Cedarburg Cultural Center, and I'd like to welcome you here this afternoon. We hardly need the fireplace on this beautiful spring day, but we promise that the conversation will be very cool. As you all know, today's topic is social and cultural life in Cedarburg. We encourage you to ask questions and get our panelists in a little trouble. There really are no holes barred. You can ask them where the best place was to bring a hot date years ago, or what the shenanigans that went on at Turner Hall might have been. I'm sure you can just use your imagination. Anyway, today's chat will be the last one in this season's series, but there's already plans for another series starting in the fall. If you look on your programs, you'll see the dates. The first one begins on October 8th, and we hope that you'll join us again this fall. We also wanted to point out that we have videos available of the Fireside Chat 1, 2, and 3. The first ones that we dubbed were so popular that we're all sold out, but we are taking orders for more. They're $8 each, and if you're interested, you can sign up at the front table. The chats have really grown beyond our wildest dreams in these 3 sessions that we've had so far. And over the course of that, our expenses for these have kind of mushroomed too. And we were going to ask you to play a role in continuing the series and keeping it strong and viable because it has proved to be so very popular. One way that you can do this is by supporting the auction that we're going to be having on May 20th at the Interurban Depot. This was made possible by the heirs of the Martha Cafale estate, who donated her estate to the Cultural Center. We received some very nice things for the Kiefa's House and the General Store Museum, and what we couldn't make good use of, we are auctioning off. And we also invite you to consider contributing something to the auction. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation and help us out, we'd love to talk to you. Just see me after the chat today. Otherwise, we'd welcome you as customers too. And during the course of today's chat, we were going to lean on you a little bit to support us in a more direct way using the time-honored method of passing the hat. And because this is an event that focuses on history, we used old-fashioned hats, but at some point during the proceedings, we'll discreetly pass these around, and if you can give us $1 or $2 or $3 to help make this series continued, we'd be very, very grateful. I'd also like to pass along some thanks. Cream City Coffee has come forward as a participating sponsor of this event, and we're very appreciative of that. Tri-City Bank loaned us some of the furniture that you see on the stage. We have a wonderful committee that's behind this event, and as many of you know, the original person who came up with the idea that got this started was Judy Jepson, so we owe her a debt of gratitude. Another person I wanted to thank is Irene Zahn. She provided the newspaper clippings that are in your packet that I think you'll find very interesting reading. With that, I'll turn things over to our wonderful moderator, Jim Coots. And again, thank you all for coming. Be sure to take a look at the display that we have over here, and we hope you enjoy yourselves.
Thank you, Sarah. And let me just explain a little bit as far as the hat is concerned. It does cost us some expenses as far as the sound system is concerned, and there are a couple other expenses that relate to that, and with the tapes, both the audio and the visual tapes, so we would appreciate any support that you can give us. It's my pleasure again to serve as moderator. And I'd like to introduce the participants in our program today. First of all, Bob Armbruster. And Bob was here from the beginning, so he's got a lot of information. Bob takes more static than anybody else, I think, as far as knowing some things about Cedarburg. So Bob, thanks again for participating. And Erna Burmeister, who just about a month ago, I think, Erna celebrated the 91st birthday. And our former fire chief who participated in the last fireside chat, Chief Bill Ritter. Tony Fisher, who was one of our participants in the first fireside chat along with Bob, Vivian Lobbs, Vivian Sheriff Lobbs, and a lifelong resident of Cedarburg, and Joan Muehlheisen Worth, again, another lifelong Cedarburg resident. And what we want to do today, as Sarah suggested, is to look at social and cultural life in Cedarburg, kind of concentrating on the Turner Hall and Hilgen Springs Park, and also I think some of the advertising said some things about the Chimes Theater. And what's going to happen again is we're going to start off by asking these people to share with us one remembrance that they have of Cedarburg, of one of those things, and it might be something that some of you have. And we're going to have people, Bob and Marcia Smith are going to be circulating with cards. And we'll do the same thing as we've done before. If you have a question that you would like to ask of the panel or something that you think of that you'd like to have brought up, please put something down on one of those cards, and we'll do that. And we'll go until about 4 o'clock, and then any questions or anything you want to talk to the panelists, you can. Also, there's a nice display over here. Eddie Rappold put together a couple books of pictures of Hilgen Springs Park and of Turner Hall. Plus, Vivian has brought along a lot of stuff, and Bob has brought a lot of stuff along that's over there on display, so that you can get an opportunity to see that as well. Okay, so let's get started by me asking Bob. Let's start with you, and we'll go right around the circle. Something that you would like to share, some memory, something you'd like to share about either Turner Hall or Hilgen Springs Park.
Well, the Turner Hall was right across from our store. And my uncle had something to do with the management of it, so we had the keys for the Turner Hall. So we saw all the events that went on. The high school and the school system rented the gym for their gym classes and for their sporting events. So I got to see all the high school basketball games, and when I was in school, we marched from the school buildings over to the gym, changed into gym shoes. Everybody had a pair of gym shoes stored in the 2 cloakrooms on the left and right side of the entrance, so we had to find our shoes, put them on, and we went to gym classes and returned there. So I was practically in that Turner Hall a couple of times a week. As a remembrance of the Turner Hall, when they tore it down, this is the cash box. All the events were low priced, and the money was in coins, so this is the cash box that they used at the time.
Bob, who did you say was the person who ran that cash box, or was there for a lot of the events? Did you?
Mr. Charles Bradburn was the one for the mask ball. They always had I might as well bring this one out right away. On Saturday nights, once a year, the Cedarburg Turnverein had a mask ball, and they had the prizes. First group of 5 was $6.50. The total of prizes was $42. And this will surprise Joan. Her father-in-law and Sandy's father, Gus Worth, was the orchestra, the High Mount Country Club Orchestra. And the prices were $75, $50, and 30 cents, depending on if you participated, or 30 cents if you sat in the balcony to watch.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Erna, how about you?
Well, where should I start? I know so much and I'm not a very good talker.
Just share with us whatever you feel like.
Well, we were talking about Hilgen Spring Park, and that I remember real well because this happened in 1911. I was only 2 years old, And I was so happy because my older brothers and sisters, they always talked about Hilgen Spring Park. And here I was home, 2 years old, nobody to play with. And I had to listen to that all the time. And I thought, well, gee whiz, when am I going to get there? So one day, it was a nice sunny day. My mother said to me, Erna, you're going to get your chance to see Hilgen Spring Park. Oh my gosh, I almost jumped out of my skin. Why? I said, well, you know, we got this new brother at home, little baby brother, just a few weeks old. We're going to take him for a ride down to Hilgen Spring Park. Goody, goody, goody. I couldn't wait. Well, it finally arrived, you know, and Mother said to me, you can even push the buggy. I said, oh, goodness sakes. So we got out on the sidewalk, you know, and I got up on the in back of the buggy. I couldn't even reach the handles. More or less, I couldn't see where I was going, looking right into the buggy. Well, she says, all you have to do is just push it. Oh, I was a little afraid because the baby was in there. Well, I gave him a push. Sure enough, my mother screamed, my gosh, she says, I'm going to take care of it. Now you just tag along. Oh, I was so disappointed. And that was a long, long ride down to Hilgen Spring Park. From Washington and Cleveland way down to Hamilton, I think it was. Well, anyway, we got down to the park, and it was so disappointing to me. I had never been there, didn't know anybody. My friends were all only 2-year-old. They had to stay home. So the day dragged on, and of course, everybody wanted to see the baby. They didn't worry about anything else. They wanted to see the baby. Well, the day went on. It was time to go home. Here I thought I was going to get a nice ride home in the buggy. 2 years old. My mother said, no, you have to walk. Oh my goodness, I thought. All that way home again. But I forgot to tell you, when my mother hollered there about she was going to take over, the buggy was stuck in the wooden sidewalks they had those days. I was going to mention that at the beginning. I should have rehearsed it, but I didn't. Well, anyway, we were back home again, and that night, I didn't even thank God for anything. I was so disappointed. So that was my first trip down to Hilgen Spring Park. So I don't know if that's as far as you want me to go or what.
I bet it wasn't your last trip there.
What?
I bet you went there a lot of other times.
Oh, when I was in the teens, of course, then we went every Sunday afternoon, we went down there. And I had a hell of a good time.
Okay, well, let's go around and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about Hilgen Springs Park.
When I got to be a young lady, you know, naturally you want to go and dance. We had lots of fun.
Now, Bill, I know you have something there from Turner Hall that you brought along.
Yeah, I brought a picture, and it's on a table over here. My mother was a member of the Turnverein in 1903, and these were the kingpins that they used to use for exercise. And if you look at the picture, it's over on a table someplace over here, and all the names are on the back of it. So some of you old-timers, maybe you'll recognize some of those people from way back. The Turner Hall was, like Bob says, was rented to the school board, and that was our gymnasium. And it was my gymnasium for my 4 years in high school. And after high school, I played basketball with the Turners for 8 years, and until the time that they tore the Turner Hall down, why, that's where we played our games. I brought a few pictures of the Turner basketball team from years ago, and if you look on there, there aren't a hell of a lot of members left. I know on one of them, just Babe Freeze and I, we're the last of the members of that team. And that Turner Hall, just Bob says about Maxwell, you used to have a yard mark there. And that was similar to that. And you'd go there, they had a little gambling in the basement, dancing upstairs, and plenty to eat. It was the center of all the attractions in the city of Cedarburg. Anybody had a wedding, they celebrated it at the Turner Hall. It was the same all the time. And I can remember that the times that I played there, 4 years of high school basketball and 8 years of Turner basketball, pleasant memories in the guys' memory. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I also know that you happened to have one of the larger cars when you played with the Turners, and Harry Wiegert and I were looking at a ledger book a couple weeks ago that showed that you got like $2 to drive to Kewaskum to take the team there.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you went, or no, I think it was $1.75 for Kewaskum and $2 for Mayville, because Mayville was a little bit further.
I know Harry Wiegert also had a receipt from the Mr. Hacker for the rental of the Turner Hall for one game, $5. That covered the heat and electricity and the use of the hall.
Okay, Tony, how about you?
Well, I probably have lots of memories of all these things. The Turner Hall, one of my sisters had her wedding reception there. They used to have medicine shows that I guess they were really packed, and they'd put on a little entertainment, and then they sell their medicine, and they would sell quite a few things there. And then they would give you a little more entertainment, but that was one of the things that went on besides the masquerade balls and the Turner basketball games and many other things. The thing that I probably would want to share is with our class reunion class play we had there. One of the scenes, one of the fellows was sitting down, he had a cigarette and he wanted a light, and the fellow went up to him and he kept on striking the match and it wasn't lighting, and finally the fellow sitting and said, well, you might try the right side, turn it around and get the right side. And of course that really wasn't in the play, but that was really the only laugh. This was held for the grade school kids, where they always had a preview session before they had it on for the adults, and that was the only laugh we got from the grade school kids. And the other thing that happened during that play is one of the fellows that was supposed to be helping move the scenery around from one act to the other, he was standing near the curtain, and when the curtain came down, it hit his coat and it rolled up. And this was taking place in a girls' school or something, and the girls were supposedly in their bed in there, and they had just jumped out, and the curtain went up, and they got a little excited, everybody saw.
Vivian?
Some of my remembrances of Hilgen Spring Park, we took care of Emmanuel Cemetery from 1947 to 59, and the park area was still there. When we finished doing all the work on the cemetery, we'd get cleaned up, and my mom and dad and my twin brother and I would walk down there, and we'd tour the whole area, walk through the woods, and they had a dance hall and a bar. They had a big barn where they kept all their wagons and stuff. And as we were walking around, my parents heard some groaning and a noise going on, and well, my dad and my brother kind of walked around, and here they saw a fella who had been on the picnic and probably had a couple too many beers, and he slid down the hill. And here he was digging like an animal would dig to try and keep himself up there. And my dad and brother went and got a hold of the belt and kind of pulled him up, and my mom and dad went to somebody from the picnic and said, we think we have one of your picnic goers that needs a little help. So they came and went along with my mom and I to where my dad and brother were and helped the fella up, and all things ended well. So.
Okay, Joan?
I can remember my grandmother's house was exactly where the street is between the bank and the Cream City Coffee House. That was where my grandmother, and I spent most of my childhood there. My mother was not well when I was a child, so I spent a lot of time there. And I can remember going to the Turner Hall, and my aunties were so excited because I was going to see Hansel and Gretel. I got one look at that witch, and I was down those stairs and back into Grandma's kitchen, and they were not happy people. They thought, oh, they were doing a great big thing for me. Talking about John's or Bob's with the school, I was reading Adley had written into one of these books, and he said they finally decided to build the gym downtown here in Washington, on Washington Avenue across from the church, because the kids were sloshing through beer on Monday morning in their gym shoes, and that was just too much to take.
Was Turner Hall kind of the center of the social and cultural activities in the city when it was really in its prime? Anybody, just pick up now. Let's just pick up from here and let's just share.
The home show was there. They had the home, and I can remember just loving it because I spent the time running around upstairs and down. They had, you know, an upper balcony and a lower balcony and the stage, and you could go all over. I mean, I never saw my parents, so that's why I liked it. But I guess there had to be other things going on before my time.
Well, there were many plays at the Turner Hall. There were some fundraisers. One was called A Womanless Wedding, where everybody was dressed as the men were dressed as women, and I have a picture over there of that occasion. But then we also had the high school proms there. Every year they used to try to outdo the previous year. I remember one year they strung wires across from one balcony to the other, and then they took branches and took paper mache cherries to represent cherry blossoms and cherries, and they covered the whole top of the gym with cherry blossoms. So they were great times there.
Erna, you?
Can I say something?
Yeah. Or Bill? Yeah, go ahead.
I was a small boy, and I went to a demonstration at the Turner Hall one night with my parents, and it was put on by Armbruster's music department, not the jewelry department, but the music department. We got there, and they had an Edison or a phonograph on the stage, and an Edison phonograph was the one that played the records that were thick records, and this also could be made into a Victor music box. And they had somebody singing there who had recorded the records. And then the man would sing, and then they'd play the recording on the phonograph to show how wonderful that phonograph was. Down below was a door, and there were slots in there, and that's where you could put your records. And incidentally, my parents bought one of them. I don't know if it was the one that was on the stage, but we got one. And this was before we had radio. So as soon as we had the radios, which wasn't long after that, this piece of musical piece became obsolete and went into the attic. And it stayed there for over 60 years. Today, my grandson, Dr. Bruce Massaro, has it in his home at Economawalk, and it's in the same condition as when we bought it. How much is it worth, Bob? How much will you give us for it?
Bill, Bob's probably got 3 or 4 of them just like that. Bob, the other day when we were looking at pictures, I think there was one picture there where you said that it was Worth or somebody, that the Turner Hall was packed with people, and was it Worth that had the annual, some kind of a party there or something? Or
demonstrate farm machinery there. They'd have tractors out in front, and then inside the farmers were invited to the Turner Hall, and they had programs and things for their farm machinery.
I'll tell you something about Turner Hall. Go ahead. You know, when they had the showers down there, my brother Melvin, he was a big basketball player. And you know, we always wondered why he had that nickname, Bear Tracks. So someone told me once, you have to see this. When they come out of the shower, he was flat-footed, and he walked like this, you know, patch, patch, patch. And then he got the name of Bear Tracks, and he kept it all his life.
The showers in the Turner Hall were 2 showers in the bar room. And
Well, I wasn't there, I can't
No.
tell you.
and if you had a visiting team, you all undressed and dressed in the same room and showered in the same stalls.
Saturday night, they had chunks of ice and it cooled the beer barrels. And then on Monday, come gym time, they had cleaned it up, but you'd still have that beer odor.
When you hear that term Turner, now I know the Turnverein, that was the German society. Now, was there actually, now I know you've got some pictures, Bob, I don't know if you brought any along, of the actual gymnastics type of, was there a lot of that took place? Besides the other activities that were there?
They were very athletic.
Originally, they were really active. In the ceiling, there were hooks hanging from the ceiling, and there were ropes attached to those, and they had the bars, the mats. They spent the whole week, usually weekends were the popular time for the Turnverein, and they'd work out there. Let's see.
Yeah, Tony.
I have a sidereal here from 1927. That's the year that my brothers graduated. They both graduated in the same year. The reason they graduated the same was when they came to town, I don't think they could speak any English. In fact, I don't even know if they spoke German. I think it was Croatian. But anyways, they had to sort of fight their way to school because the kids were picking on them because they were different. And we got several pictures in here, in fact, 3 pictures of the Turner Hall, on the gym classes and one of the prom in 1927, if anybody cares to see how it looked, if they don't remember the Turner Hall. So, and I also remember they had lots of things going on with the basketball games. The Turner games were very exciting in those days because the city was small and it really was packed. And one time they had the Globetrotters there, and I wanted to see that, and I didn't have any money to get in, but I don't know how I got in, but I did. And I forgot about the time, and I didn't tell my parents that I was going there, and they were looking all over for me. And they finally found me there. My sister found me there and brought me home before the game was over, which didn't make me very happy.
Somebody mentioned something about the traveling medicinal shows. Can somebody elaborate on that? The shows that were there? Some of the shows that were there? Did somebody mention that? The medicine shows. The medicine shows. Somebody mentioned that, didn't they, Tony? Yeah.
Well, he had this.
Yeah, Chautauqua they called it. But I don't think that was held in the Turner Hall. That was up at the fairgrounds.
They used to come with their own tent. I know they had it on the school grounds once, and in a tent. And he sell you the medicine for the tapeworm, right?
And they handed out prizes, and all you had was kisses or silk stockings that you couldn't wear, all kinds of foolish things.
I remember demonstrating how some of the rubbing things went, how strong they were. He took a belt and he held a bottle on one side, and it took just a second for the oil rubbing alcohol or whatever, rubbing ointment that they had to penetrate the leather, and that was supposed to show how what it would do to your skin.
Yeah, Vivian.
Well, I remember when I used to go to school, walking on Washington Avenue, we'd run up the steps and slide down the railing. That was a daily ritual for us. And my sister worked there later on in the years. There was a shoe factory in there. I remember that. I remember a picture with the sign on, shoe factory. But that's later on.
had, I think, was Weber's Hill. That was the place to go. There were no automobiles to worry about, and in winter when we had snow, we would go up on that hill and we'd go right through to Washington Avenue, right over to St. John Street. The horses had to look out for us, not the automobiles.
Now you said a shoe factory was in there, and then eventually the Turner Hall was ripped down, and I know I did see some information that there was it's quite interesting to read that today. There was a real attempt to try and restore Turner Hall, and there was like a ballot in the News Graphic that was taken kind of just a kind of free will type of thing, sent it in, and it was defeated 8-1 to restore Turner Hall. That would be interesting to see what would happen with that today. But evidently what happened, did Turnvereen kind of have problems or something, financial problems? Or I was wondering if once the community gym was built, now I know that was a WPA project, if that kind of replaced the Turner Hall in terms of like places for dances and activities and that type of stuff, and then the Turner Hall kind of fell in disrepair, or, you know, maybe you can fill us in on that. Vivian, go ahead.
The bank just, bought the property, and where First Star Bank is, that's why it was torn down in the News Graphic. There's an article on the back table too with the picture what I brought out of the paper, and said, I think it was in 1961 when it was torn down, and the bank is probably going since 63 or 64, something like that.
I have a picture back there of the Cedarburg News and of the Turner Hall. That was Mr. Rappel's. We had it up in Emmy's restaurant when it first opened. But it's a good picture of both of the buildings. And then my uncle, Adley Horn, was writing about the Turner Hall, and he said that when you came out here, the Turners came from Milwaukee, and they really, really thought this was wonderful, and they were free thinkers. And then it was sort of, the people were not too crazy about them because they wanted to take care more of their bodies than of their souls. So they were kind of agnostics. So, but the kids went to the Turner Hall all the time too. But that was in their day, not mine. I do have my great-grandfather apparently must have had something at the Turner Hall back in 1872. That, I don't know, it's all in German. I can't understand that either. I'm not terribly helpful with this thing, but I'm here.
Well, there's a lot of the original records. Bob has some, and I know Harry Wiegert has some, and they are in the German. And there was some we were looking at the other day, Bob, that they did have some English in there later on. They had,
after World War I, it wasn't popular to keep your minutes in German.
Yeah, Tony,
I remember when this was coming up about tearing down or selling the Turner Hall. My brother, the former mayor, was involved at that time organizing, along with some other people, a group, and they had a meeting trying to do something about saving it, but that fell through. And he also tried to, he wanted to save the Hilgen Spring Park. He asked the city to buy it at that time, and they could have got it for something like $26,000, the entire 60-some acres.
63 acres.
And the council wouldn't go along with it, and a few years later, they needed an acre or two for the sewer plant, and they had to pay more for those 2 acres or whatever they got than they did for the whole 60-some acres.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Hilgen Spring Park now.
Can I say one more thing about the
Bill,
Turner
go
Hall?
ahead.
When the fire department found out that they were going to tear down the Turner Hall, we had a referendum on the spring election to stop the destruction of the Turner Hall, and we lost by 100 votes. If you had that vote today, you wouldn't find 50 votes to tear it down.
How true. Let's talk a little bit about Hilgen Springs Park. I noticed the last time I was in Barst, they have a menu there when you come in the back door. They have one of the menus from Hilgen Springs Park. They have an advertisement with all the different buildings. We have a lot of pictures here, and Johnny Barth, whose dad was the last owner of Hilgen Springs Park, I believe, if I'm right in that Walter Barth was the last owner. He and Mr. Straub were the owners of it, and John made a tape of Hilgen Springs Park, and I was quite interested because one of the things that he said is that some of the games and the amusements that they had there, they brought from Waukesha Beach. And I'm originally from Waukesha, and I remember as a kid going to Waukesha Beach. And did people from, now Erna, you said you would go down to Hilgen Springs Park, and that was something that was open. It wasn't just a resort for people from Milwaukee to come out here. Cedarburg people, there were a lot of events and activities that took place down there. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
As far as I know, all we children did was play ball or goof around whichever way you could. Everybody had different ideas and you carried it out. There were no merry-go-rounds, anything like that. Not to my knowledge. It was a lot of ball games. We did the girls as well as the boys. They played ball. No matter where you found a spot, you played ball.
They had some rides like these cars that you'd bump into each other. They were run electrically, and something like a Ferris wheel. I brought a picture along. My grandfather was mayor in 1922, and they had many groups that came out. This was the Upper 3rd Street Commercial Association. They're all on the balcony, all well-dressed, and they used to come out either on the train or the interurban, and my grandfather always welcomed them. I've got a little arrow here where he's sitting, but there were picnics with 10,000, 15,000 people on some Sundays. They had parking from the road in front of the Cedars all the way up to the railroad tracks. A lot of people drove, a lot of them came out by train.
I have a list of them. I talked to John Barth because I knew they had rides down there at one time, but I didn't remember all of them. He gave me the list, and they had a fun house, they had seaplanes, merry-go-round, the whip, scooter ponies, shooting galleries, ski boat alley, and they had 4 boats that you could get and take a ride down the river. That's just some of the things that they had there when they had picnics and that.
After they had so many dances down there, they were quite often. And they had some trouble with a bunch of rowdies coming from Milwaukee, always starting fights. I don't know how it turned out anymore, but they must have behaved after a while.
There were, to my recollection, and there's a lot of people here who know a lot more about this than I do, but I was amazed to see the number of buildings that were there and how big it was, the hotel and the dining room and all the other things that were there. And Vivian, you were close to that too.
Well, I brought a lot of postcards that are on display in the back table, and I remember, like, when we first moved down Hamilton, that was just a wide open ballpark. We used to play a lot of baseball games down there too, and the other side was all woods. And I do a lot of walking, and my husband and we kind of took a little campaign to see how many homes, and right now there are about 89 families living in that general area, what was the Cedars. And many people say, you know, they're so sorry Hilgen Spring Park wasn't able to be saved, which I am too, but in one case, I'm kind of happy it turned into the Cedars bowling alley. I used to bowl 2 nights a week, and my husband now, at that time, I didn't know him real well, but he bowled 2 nights a week, and it ends up that's where I met my husband, at the bowling alley. So I'm kind of glad it came there.
When was the Cedars built?
41 they started. And in 1952, I think it was February 13th, they had grand opening. And in 42, they ran an ad in the Cedarburg News, and it said you could have transportation from the interurban station to the Cedars, and they had rides from 8 in the evening till 6 in the morning on New Year's Eve, and they had meals, turkey and steak dinners for $1.25, dancing, bowling. I clipped it out of the paper, and I have it with the postcards on the back on the table. But those were the good old days with the nice prices.
Let me just remind you about questions. If anybody has any questions, people will be circulating and send them in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Tony. You're gonna.
Well, she talked about the price of steak. Well, I talked to John Barson. The price of steak back then was 35 cents when his dad was running it way back when he first started. And they had 3 dining rooms. One was only used in the summer, but it was like an open deck with a screen. And then they had a regular dining room. Then they had a smaller dining room that was called the Gold Room, and which was in winter for smaller parties. And it was a very popular place. And besides that, they had gambling there. They had the big 6-wheel and everything else. And that's what kept the place going. If they would have not cut out gambling when they did back there, they probably never would have lost the place. But because once the gambling went away and the depression set in, they just didn't have enough money to keep it going then.
Somebody has asked if there were the reason that it was called Hilgen Springs. Were there springs down there in that area?
Yes. When you first came into the park, they had like a mound. It was all stones, but out of that, there was like a fountain. They had a cup hanging on the side where you could catch the water and have a drink. There was a lot of springs all around Cedarburg, not only there.
Did they have Ritter soda at Hilgen Springs Park?
I don't think they knew about them.
They had several people that operated Hilgen Spring Park as a soda water factory, but in my time, starting in 1932, we took care of all the soda water at Hilgen Spring Park. Jim Hilgen, incidentally, was my great-great-grandfather. His daughter was married to Dietrich Wittenberg, who started the wool mill, and he was my great-grandfather. And I can remember a lot of the big picnics that they had at Hilgen Spring Park. Bob just talked about them. I remember one, and I know that they had Seaman Body there. They had different organizations from Milwaukee. They would take their employees out there for their annual picnic. I don't know just which one it was at one time, but they used 360-some cases of soda water. And everything was free to the employees, the meat, the meal and the drinks. And towards the end of the day, then the employees would go up to the stand and say, leave the cap on. And the bottles would go along home to Milwaukee. And that day we lost 77 cases of bottles.
How much money?
That I lost track of a long time ago. But on Saturday night, we were talking about the menu at bars. I know we would go down there on Saturday night, and for 35 cents, you got a duck dinner with mashed potatoes, vegetables, and the whole deal. 35 cents. But our paycheck for the week was in same correspondence as it was.
Yeah.
That all worked out the same.
When the people came out for those big picnics, Bill, I would assume they came both on the interurban and on the railroad too, because the railroad depot was right there near. Or was it just interurban that they came out?
Yeah, but at that time, then you had a lot of automobiles already. See, you know what I mean? But years ago, when you go way back, then people came out on the railroad or by horse and buggy, you know, and that's why we had so many small hotels or sleeping places in Cedarburg. The salesmen would come here and would have to stay overnight.
Well, they did have a hotel down there also.
Oh, yes.
And originally when it started, because when they didn't have all these autos and that, they did have an extra track where the A train would come up from Chicago or wherever, maybe beyond. They would actually pull out over and stay there till it was ready for time to go home again. So they came from St. Louis and all over.
There's some pretty nice transportation from the trains. I've got some pictures. I should just step out a minute and bring a couple of those over here. Pictures of the carriages that they brought the guests to. They came from Chicago, even as far as St. Louis to stay over here. I'll try to get some of those pictures to show you.
Well, yeah, as I said before, there's a lot of pictures. There's a lot of information over there on the various things that once we're done, you know, people can go over and look at those. Was Hilgen Springs open year round, or was it primarily a summertime type of thing?
I don't know. I wasn't here yet.
I know it was only summertime.
The resort
was always open.
They had the dining room and banquets and that.
That was open all the time.
And the slot machines, Jerry says. Yeah, you went down there when you were small, huh, Jerry?
No gambling in the city of Cedarburg.
No, no.
Cross the railroad tracks and then you could gamble.
Now,
Until
Vivian,
the fire department ran the ticket jars. Then we had gambling in the city of Cedarburg.
Vivian, something that I just found out recently is that the house that's across from the Girl Scout house on the corner of Spring and Hilbert,
Right.
with the rock port, that was Bauer's
Cafe.
Cafe.
Yes.
Was that there for people who were going to? Was that associated at all with Hilgen Springs Park, or was that separate?
I don't really know if it was connected with it, but the building was there. One of my girlfriends lived there. That's how I got to know about that house. And when I went in to visit, the whole back porch was all glass ceiling. And I kind of wondered what that glass ceiling was for. But that's where they kept all their ferns and that. And the postcards will show a library area and a dining area. I have another picture at home from a paper I didn't bring, but it shows, I think, Mr. Wiesler probably taking the picture, and there were old dirt roads and that, so it's been there a long time. It's too bad they couldn't preserve that. It kind of looks going downhill now.
Tony?
Well, John Barth, remember he talked about the soda. He says the Ritters would bring 100 cases of soda for some picnic, and at the end of the day, he and somebody else had to go around picking up all those bottles.
Besides the Hilgen Springs Park and Turner Hall, were there other places in Cedarburg where there were social events and dances, those type of activities held, or was it primarily within the city?
Down Hamilton too used to be a dance hall right on the corner, across from Dietrich's farm area. Now it's a little town park they have too. But I remember a lot of my postcards that I collect, they would come from Milwaukee to Cedarburg saying, I'll meet you at the dance hall, 8 o'clock or something like that. That's how they commuted before the telephones. So you get a lot of little messages on the postcard for 1 cent mail.
Cedarburg and Hamilton. Now there's a connection there, and we have a question that somebody asked, and this has been asked at some of the other fireside chats, that evidently that there were some houses here that weren't necessarily houses of well repute, that were the Cedarburg Country Club was one that's been mentioned, and somebody asked a question. We've heard rumors that Cedarburg and Hamilton each had houses of ill repute. Is that true?
I delivered soda.
Bill, did you deliver soda there?
And they usually were behind the bar.
Anybody else comment on that you're aware of? Yeah,
All
go
I
ahead.
remember about the country club was when we were kids, we worked for one of our neighbors picking mustard seed in the fields, and the father would come and take us into the country club and buy us a little soda. But that's all that I know. I don't know all the rest of the goings on about it.
I don't know if Bill was involved with the fire department at that time, but there was a fire that took place there, and unfortunately, one of the local farmers or something got caught in that fire and had to come out. And the whole town was always at all those fires, and it was a very unfortunate situation for him.
Don't get me in on anything.
You had the Hilgen Springs, and we had the Turner Hall, and as you said, Hamilton, and what type of things did teenagers do when you were teenagers? Did you go to these places when you were teenagers? Were there other activities in Cedarburg for teenagers? I know that parlor games and that type of stuff were pretty prevalent, but for those were the major social areas that you would deal with in those areas, or what about?
I went to a lot of dances, went to a lot of sporting events. I have a twin brother. He was involved in everything, basketball, football, baseball. So I was a tom boy, tom girl, whatever. If I wanted to play, I had to join them, and I learned to understand all the sports, and I still go to a lot of high school activities today.
And we always had to walk. We didn't have no cars or bikes or anything. You had to walk, so that took care of a lot of your time.
I think one of the main places of where the teenagers went when I was in high school was either Garrett's drugstore or Goosey's drugstore. That's where they would meet at night when, as she says, they didn't have cars or anything else. That's where you'd meet and spend your time, and have somebody like Celia Tomczyk, who was very generous and give you an ice cream soda for very little.
When I was a teenager, I think probably the gym down here, that's now well, whatever it is, was where they held all of the proms, all of the dances, where we had gym. And of course, you have to remember the schools were right behind it. The high school was right next door, and Lincoln, the grade school, was right behind that. And talking about my generation, we're having our 50th class reunion on the 10th of June, and there were 68 graduates. Now I don't know how many graduates they have in high school, 200 and some or something. And we're down to I don't know how many, but we have an actuary in our class that keeps telling us the next one you're going to have 3 less. I mean, I don't need him.
Somebody talked about talking to one of the Hilgens about having large wooden tubs and a way to heat the water at Hilgen Park that evidently on Saturday night when the water was heated, they blew a whistle and people from Cedarburg came to take baths. Does anybody know more about that, or if that's true? Anybody hear anything about that at all?
I never heard it. Well, in one of the articles that I clipped out of the paper, it said that the children would have their bath at home. They would heat a little water and put them in the tub, but the parents would go down to the Cedars in the evening and take their baths there because the homes didn't have the facilities to do it. But it's printed in one of those articles. I don't know. Oh. I'm not speaking from experience.
Well, I used to
Tony.
At the old electric company, the plant down there on Mequon Street, they had some showers that people would go to. You could go there for a quarter or something, you could take a shower. I know I did once.
Where the municipal, where the architects are now, that used to be the
right.
generating plant. Yeah. Movies. Somebody, I thought, said something one time about that. They did have movies once in a while at Turner Hall, but also, what about the Chimes Theater? Was that the only theater that was here?
That was
The first one was up there on
Loibel's was first, and then was the village. And Loibel's had silent films.
Go ahead, Erna. What were you going to say? And then John?
this one that we went to was the Chimes Theater, and that was up on Center Street, where the railroad where the interurban station was, up there. The building is still there. I think there's Denniston is now, but that's where we went. And Mr. Leibel, I guess, was the one that was running that. And we would go on a Saturday night for 10 cents, you know, you'd get a bag of popcorn. But you always had to wait for that news article run about 15 minutes before the actual picture came along.
My brother ran the film, and he also had they had something there that I guess they didn't even have in Milwaukee, because I know some people from Milwaukee came out to see a movie at the Chimes Theater because they would play music along that, you know, if it was an exciting part, you know, that they'd have the music that would go with it. And of course, Mr. Loyable also had an organ down below, and once in a while when he didn't play the music, he would go down there and play the organ to go along with the film. And that was quite unusual in those days. And I know as I said, my brother worked there, and he was very nice because, Mr. Loyal says we could all go in for nothing as long as he worked there. So that was a great deal, because otherwise you'd never get to the movie.
And because on the movies it was only script. Yeah. There was no sound. Boy, am I old.
John,
I say?
I remember Loyable's Theater because I can remember as a little girl I stayed, as I said, most of the time with my grandmother. My Aunt Ruth was supposed to be taking care of myself and my cousin David. And Aunt Ruth loved to have a good time, so if David and I would go to the movies, she could have a good time. So we would go up, and I can remember running home so scared we'd watch The Mummy's Tomb. And we didn't only watch it once, we watched it twice, just like this, you know, slunk in our seats. And I can remember that theater, and then I remember the Rivoli, when Mark Morgan opened that. I was there for the opening. And I don't know who was the actor, the Westerner? Tom Mix, I think. I have a picture of that.
I remember seeing something someplace where, somebody came to. Did when you were younger, and I talk about social and cultural things, how about going to Milwaukee as far as entertainment or that type of thing? Did that take place? Did people do that?
Sure. Oh, yeah, we did. You know, on Saturday mornings when I was going to high school, there were about 6 of us girls. We always wanted to go down to Milwaukee to the show on Wisconsin Avenue, to the, I don't know, was it called the Palace? I forget the name. Well, anyway, we didn't have no way of getting there, so we decided to hike one morning. We got up bright and early, I guess it was 4:30 or something, and we started to hike. Well, we got as far as Zoiner's, you know, the end of Cedarburg. And a man with a truck stopped. They always had markets in Milwaukee. So he asked us where we were going, and we said we were going to go to Milwaukee. Well, he said, you can ride along if you can find room. He had a bunch of produce, you know. And 2 of them sneaked in by him next on his front seat. The rest of us had to find places in between the baskets or something. So we got down there, and he took us as far as 4th and Kilburn, where he was going to get rid of his produce. Well, we thought that wasn't too bad because we knew that wasn't too far from the theater. So that was fine. We got up there, and we had to pay 10 cents to get in. But we had to sit way upstairs. They called it NIRGER, heaven, see? So that was way, way up. I thought I was actually in heaven already. And we had a good time. So the thing was over with, you know. And the man said to us, well, if you're here by, I don't know, was it 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, you can ride back with me. Well, we didn't want to miss out on that. So we managed to get over there, and sure enough, he had good sales, got rid of all his stuff. And he said, well, the rest of you can all pile in the back there. So we did, but of course, 3 of us had to sit on the tailgate and let our feet hang, you know. You mayn't do that now. But we did, and we had a hell of a good time. He took us way back to Cedarburg and dropped us off at Soiner's house again. Well, from there we had to go home, which wasn't too bad. But we had a good day.
Well, I was talking about the Chimes Theater. This Bill Leubel was quite a promoter, and he played the organ, of course, there, and they sold popcorn and things like that. He also sold advertising that was shown before the films, and then there was a second movie, and he always showed pictures. These were slides that the different stores had that would be projected. They called it the Magic Lantern, and this is one that our store had for Big Ben clocks and Elgin watches and Edison phonographs. So I've got about 80 of these slides. They were painted with, I understand, with camel's hair brushes, and then between two glass slides to make it. I've got the camera projector for these, and they work out real well. This
you can bring that along next time, Bob, and we'll use that next.
This theater had a pitched floor from high in the back and pitched towards the front. I remember one evening, I was sitting in the back. You could smoke in the theater, so there was a lot of smoke in the air. And then on a warm night, they just opened with no air conditioning. They opened two doors in the front near the screen, and then one in the back. And one night I saw this one boy reach at his leg and stomping his leg, and I was wondering what was happening. And the mice came in and ate the popcorn on the floor, and the one crawled up his leg. And he was stamping to get rid of the mouse in his leg. You were allowed to smoke in the back of the theater and up in the balcony.
Here's a question. When I was a teenager, my mother said if you go to the Chimes Theater this afternoon, don't go upstairs no matter what. Does the panel know anything about this? Was there... Who's going to tell us? Was there something special upstairs that went on that people weren't supposed to know about?
Well, that's where they went to smoke. That was very popular in those days because people smoked a lot. And it was that's basically what it was. That's all I ever heard.
Now the Chimes Theater, I think we said, was located on Center Street across from the Interurban Depot. And then the Chimes was still operating when the Rivoli was
operating for a couple of years.
Now where the Rivoli building is, wasn't that Burners? And if you look in the back of it now, way on the top, you can still see it said Keither. There was because
Burner
Louise
Keither.
Fries pointed that out.
That was part of her family business.
What about, now we talk about dancing and movies and all, what about swimming? What about swimming? There's some questions been asked about where'd you go swimming in Cedar Creek? Were there specific places? Now down at Hilgen Springs Park, they had a swimming area there, didn't they?
No.
Sandy Beach.
Area at one time, in fact, two of my older brothers, that's where they started swimming. They had a little area that they must have dug out, and John said they put a fence through there so the stuff from the creek wouldn't float in there, and so that's where they swam many years ago. I can't remember that when I was growing up, but when they were growing up, they were swimming there.
We went swimming in the race behind Woolen Mills. That's where we went.
We swam at the end of Columbia, at the dam down at the end of Columbia.
Yeah, that's where they did too.
Down where Weber's Mill?
Yes,
And up at
above the dam.
Up at Burners Farm too, we did.
You dove off the bridge.
Change clothes in the woods.
We swam in back of our store area. We had a pier in back there, even lights at night, and we'd swim down towards what was a Lauterbach garage at that time.
When we lived in Hamilton Road, some of them would go across in the quarry. And they had like an old steam shovel in there yet, and they used to climb on that and dive off of that into the quarry. I didn't, but my brother did.
And we didn't have no towels or nothing. You always hid behind a bush or something. Kept your underwear on. When you went home, you didn't have no underwear.
Let's turn the tables just a little bit now, and while you guys were doing all of this stuff, one of the questions that we've been asked to ask you is, what about your parents? What did your parents do for entertainment? Did they go to the dances? Did you go along with your parents when you went to those dances? Was that separate? Did they have separate dances? Let's share a little bit about that as far as the social and cultural stuff that went on.
I think our family played sheep's head. That's about it. And the women always had so much to do that on a Saturday night, my dad would take a walk over to Cafales and have a couple of beers.
We had a lot of local taverns, of course, and everybody patronized them well. And but our parents went to movies. They didn't. Now the parents, when you played basketball in high school, now the parents really follow you. But at that time, my parents never watched me play. I don't think your parents ever watched you.
Well, and a lot of people had birthdays. A lot of birthdays were celebrated among the relation, you know. Everybody had birthday party, or they made a big deal of something. Somebody had a baby, you'd have a party. Somebody got married.
Did many people come out, say, from Milwaukee or other entertainers or bands or that type of thing? Now, Bob, on that poster it says Gus Worth and the Country Club Orchestra, High Mount Country Club Orchestra. Were there bands or entertainers or different groups that came out to entertain?
Well, I had. You saw these the other day. I had a half dozen of these different. There was a different orchestra each time. There's another large one in back there too. A number of those were from Milwaukee, and there were traveling companies that presented plays at the Turner Hall.
Plus, there were a lot of local, like you said, the Womanless Wedding. That was a fundraiser from the Turnverein, or were there other types of minstrel shows or those type of things at that time that took place on a local level that maybe local group sponsored?
Oh, sure, there were minstrel shows. I was in one. I wouldn't be caught in one now.
Tony, or John, go ahead.
I think the Washington House was probably active at the same time that these other things were going, because I have a farewell banquet for here in honor of Mr. D.E. McKinley, 1898, and it's got the whole menu in here. So apparently the Washington House must have been, well, not like it is today exactly, but certainly was very prominent in the city, I would think.
As far as I know. And there was a drugstore on the corner. Deedles, I think the name was.
Drugstores.
And Oscar Hearth was, and they had their office in there. I know that.
I think a lot of the entertainment in those days was in the home, and cards, and they'd have gatherings in their home. And I think that was the principal ways of entertainment in those days, and I think that kept on for quite a while. People, and besides that, there was so much work to do that a lot of times they didn't have the convenience they have now. When you had to wash clothes, you didn't have washing machines, and they had to do everything the hard way. And then someone didn't have a bathroom, you'd have to take a bath in a tub. I mean, you had kids. There just was a lot more work in those days for people, and they didn't have the free time they have now.
Well, our house was always busy. My mother did a lot of work for other people. And of course, we kids had to help. She made a lot of potato salad.
She made the best ham in the United States.
Right. And when you're around, you have to just help. That's all there is to it.
Now we talk about Hilgen Springs Park as far as a resort. Now, what about vacations? Did your parents ever take vacations? Do you remember going on vacations when you were younger? Was that something that happened or didn't happen?
No,
No, not that I know.
All depending on time. Again, now while you talk about Depression time, somebody asked, tell us about, Bill, I would imagine you might know about this. Tell us about bootleg activity in Cedarburg during Prohibition.
Tell me about what?
Bootleg activity.
Bootlegging.
Oh.
There was plenty of it.
Coon Cane. Does that remember?
And Schubert up in the north end.
That's right.
There were a couple places that were...
Oh, yes.
Was it pretty wide general knowledge that
Doc Bridley and I got a bottle one night, and we went back to my house, and we drank it, and I laid on the floor. I knew what was going on. I couldn't move. Paralyzed.
Somebody asked a question about, maybe this is something that whoever is here can check this out too. In the lobby of the Rivoli Theater, there's a picture of the theater in the 40s. And evidently there's a young lady who is in the ticket booth in that picture. Has anybody noticed that? Is anybody aware of who that is? Next time you go and look at it and see if you can figure out who that is. Yeah. Shirley, was that you? Huh? Oh, no, it had to be in, no. Had to be in the 60s, 50s, 60s, or 70s, yeah. So I just kind of asked this question, but again, somebody asked a question, can you share any memories of what your parents and grandparents did for fun in Cedarburg? Primarily involving around the family, correct? Yeah, Vivian?
When we were kids, my mom and dad and my twin brother and I would jump in the car and go for a little ride and get an ice cream cone, and that was a big day on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. But you did more things as a family, I think. You know, had family gatherings and reunions. Well, when my grandma passed away, the reunions kind of went by the wayside. Nobody wanted to be responsible for all the work.
How about, Bill, now you mentioned about the record player before and making the records and so on. What about the radio? Was the radio a big part of your early life in Cedarburg? As far as the radio, what part did that play?
Well, I said that before when we had this here deal that we bought from Amherster, and then later came the radio, and I remember we bought the second radio in the city of Cedarburg, and the night that we played that radio in our front room, and to hear a Chicago station and the man talking in Chicago, and there were no lines connected, I couldn't understand it at all.
Well, the first I can remember we didn't have a radio, and there was the campaign of 1928 with Herbert Hoover and Al Smith. I remember going to Amhersters to hear the campaign, or the speech.
We were involved from the early, we were the oldest RCA dealer until we gave our music up about 30-some years ago. But I went through the whole stages of radios powered by batteries for a while, and then with many radio tubes, and then when the transistors came out. But they were big sets, monstrous sets, and you had to have a technician around quite a bit. You had to string a long antenna, 50-foot antenna outside of your house to pick up the distant stations and do a lot of regulating. And we had these sets on the floor, and people would come and sit there in the evening with chairs watching television, watching radio, and then later the same thing with television.
And then when television came out, if you had a 12-inch screen, that was a big one. Those 7-inch screens and 7.5 inch.
Right.
Yeah, how times change a little bit. That really makes things different. But I don't think that did Cedarburg ever have a radio station? I was going to say, I think that's one thing that never happened here. Yeah, Tony, go ahead.
Well, I can remember when I was a child, my dad had 3 brothers in Milwaukee, and they came out quite often on weekends, and they would play music, accordions, and they do a lot of singing, and I think a lot of families entertained themselves in that kind of manner. They got together and they would play, and some of them, a lot of people seem to know how to play some instruments as a reason in those days, and they had a good time. I can even remember as a kid doing a little dance for entertaining them.
Yeah, go ahead, Vivian.
Before it gets too late, I wondered if I could have a little question myself for the audience.
Sure, go ahead.
I have a compass that says the Luminous Compass Company, Cedarburg, Wisconsin. It was patented between 1912 and 1913. And supposedly it was manufactured in Cedarburg, but of all the people that I've asked, it still works good. Nobody seems to know anything about it.
A number of times too.
Right. So if anybody knows anything, I kind of went to the library and I have a patent number, and I called Milwaukee Library and they said that it was patented in Germany, and probably this fella or whoever in Cedarburg bought the patent and started making them, but nobody seems to know. I've checked for several years already, but I can't come up with anything. And is it time for show and tell?
Yes.
I didn't get to.
Vivian has a couple interesting things that she brought along. We always ask the people to bring some artifacts with them or something that's significant to them, and she has a couple very interesting things.
Well, it was my grandpa's house where we live on Spring Street, and by the way, seeing you're the mayor, try to keep the taxes down. When he lived there, I found his tax bill, and it was $27 for the house we're living in today. I wish there were that. Good luck. But when we tore down the old barn, it wasn't worth anything. There were some really good things in there my husband and I weren't aware of when we bought the house. And we were getting ready to tear it down and working so hard and wondering if it was really worth it. Well, these things were laying upside down on a shelf in the old barn. And they're vases that went in a car. They were mounted on this little bracket, and there were 2 of them. I have the other one at home. It was a pair of vases for in the car. So that was our pay. And this was the other thing, and I was showing it to Shirley. It's a souvenir of Cedarburg. I thought it was really unique, and Shirley Burmeister said she has one like that too. I guess someone got it as a wedding gift or something. But I thought it was kind of neat.
It is neat. I get one something like that too.
Somebody asked a question about where was the entrance to Hilgen Park? Was it on Spring Street?
That was the main entrance.
Sure.
But there was a couple of side entrances.
There were other entrances down below, down.
Entrances.
How about somebody asked a question about restaurants in Cedarburg. Bob, you mentioned that there were a lot of watering holes, a lot of taverns. Were there a lot of restaurants when say, Hilgen Springs Park or the Turner Hall? Or has there been a big change in terms of the number of restaurants in Cedarburg over the years?
I wouldn't say there were.
As many as there are.
What?
Definitely more now than there was then.
More now than it was when you...
Yeah. There were a lot of hotels, as they mentioned, when a salesman came to our store, say from Chicago, he'd take the train and have his cases brought down to our store and do business with my dad, but he stayed at the Whistler Hotel, even until recent years, he even stayed at the Whistler Sisters' home on Center Street after they sold the hotel, and they'd make a day of it, and then the carrier would pick up his cases again and take them to the train, and he'd go on to the next city.
Was Weisler's Hotel where the next to where the Rivoli is there?
Yes.
Bob, the big house that was, or the big, it was like
Yeah.
very similar to a building where the real estate
Yeah.
is up the street now. Yeah.
Yeah, the traveling salesmen, they always had stories to tell. They always wanted to go to, got all the stories from these salesmen. They were real professionals.
A lot of traveling salesman stories. Yeah. What about telephone communication? Somebody asked a question about telephone communications, party lines and operators, that type of thing. How advanced a telephone system was there in Cedarburg when you were younger or as you grew up? Did you see some changes in it? Yeah, Joan, go ahead.
Yes, there are definitely some changes now that you have to dial 1262 for everything you want. My mother-in-law was a telephone operator here, and I think that they were above, that used to be the bank. It's now 2 or 3 doors down somebody's office. He's an architect or
Phil Schmidt?
something. Yes, and I think that's where the telephone office was at that time. And with restaurants, my Aunt Ruth had the pantry, which is right next to Kaler's with that window, and up above there. And when we were first married, believe it or not, we lived there, up there. And that apartment is as big as our first house was, if you ever got up there.
Very popular, the pantry. Mm-hmm. Ruth Horn had that.
Pardon, Ruth Horn?
Ruth Horn.
Yeah, that was my aunt.
Esther.
She's
Esther
the one that I
something
escaped
else.
from.
Tony.
I want to bring up something on the Hilgen Spring Park that we haven't mentioned. It. They had some Indian mounds, 2 Indian mounds up on the hill that sort of intrigued us when we were kids.
And what happened?
Somebody tells me that the state or somebody gave them permission to go in there and dig out whatever they could find, but it was too bad that they actually did that.
In some of the pictures of Hilgen Springs Park, it looks, that's one of the reasons I asked about the bar restaurant, because of all the stones there. It looked like there were a lot of stone, maybe fountains or gardens or rock garden type of thing in Hilgen Springs Park. And somebody mentioned the other day that there's still down in that area of either Park Circle or Spring Street or one of the houses down there still may have some, I think it was Johnny Barth that said that one of the houses there still may have some of that, one of those formations still as part of it.
One of his relatives, Mr. Bauer, he's the one that built around that spring. He did all that work. That's worked. He's got similar work as he had in his home down there on Spring Street, but he did all that work.
Was he a mason? Or
I don't know if he was a mason, but he did all that work.
His brother-in-law.
he was Walter Barth's brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law.
And then when Walter Barth sold the Hilgen Springs Park, is that when he started Barth's Restaurant, or had he started that? Was there association there with the sale of Hilgen Springs Park and the starting of Barth's Restaurant?
He started it after they got out of Hilgen Spring Park. It was right after that.
And that was just, you guys know better than I do as far, and Bill, you talked about this before, as far as the relationship. Hilgen started the park, and then it passed down through to Walter Barth is related, or was related to the Hilgens in one way, right? I don't know what the exact relationship was, Bill. Maybe you know that.
The ones that ran it were Walter and Ed Stroup, and they were half brothers. I don't know if they're relation to Jim Hilgen. That I wouldn't know.
Mr. Barth, either his grandmother, great-grandmother, was a sister to the Hilgen that actually started this whole thing in Cedarburg.
Jim Hilgen had a lot of daughters, and if you want to find out the whole history on that, then you go to the cemetery and you see Fred Hilgen's stone, and it's a beautiful monument, and he has all the children of Jim Hilgen listed, their dates and who they were married to. So it's right there.
That's on the Cedarburg,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Is that in Zerui?
Yeah,
Bill?
take the first driveway in. When you're going east, take the first driveway past the Ripkins estate, go to the end, and right to the about to your right, to the southwest, you'll see his great big stone, and he has Jim Hilgen's full relation listed on his stone.
Yeah, that's true.
There is a book called The Heirs of the Hilgens, and I got it at the library, but I bought it when it became published or whatever, and it tells about each generation of Hilgens, and the only reason I'm mentioning this because of the Hilgens, but my show and tell is over there on the table, and when I was married, Francis and Dick Hilgen lived up on Spring Street, and Hilgen, the estate, is across the street, and that's where I think the Hilgens probably lived, didn't they, that founded the park? Yeah. And this must have come from the Hilgen estate. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a butter dish. And you pull the thing up and you put the ice in the bottom, then the butter on top of the ice, and then it's got a regular little pulley. And I had Armbrusters do something for it in silver, so it's, for generations to come. So.
Vivian.
I understand there's 3 houses that the Hilgens owned on Spring Street. The first one is where Lyons lived right next to the 2 condos on the south side of the street with the big white pillars. And then there's people sitting in the audience that live in the Hilgens house that you're talking about.
Oh, really?
And then next to them is another smaller house. And an article I was reading said that all 3 of those homes were Hilgen homes years ago.
Well, I think that's about time is just about run out, and we do have some slides here if some of you would want to stay around to see some slides of Hilgen Springs Park. There are some pictures over there, and there are some slides here. And let me remind you about the series that will pick up in the fall again in October 8th, November 12th. That's going to be specifically one about veterans. That's one day after Veterans Day. So we thought we'd tie that one in with Veterans Day, and then another one in January. And one of the things as your program, I just want to point this out, we do have some tape recorders that are here now, and if any of you would like to put anything on tape that you would like to have us remember, your memories, we have some questions that we drew up that deal with a number of different items that can help you, give you some ideas, and those are here at the Culture Center. We would highly encourage many of you to do that. And again, let me thank our panelists and thank those of you in attendance. This has been just a great experience to be part of this, and it's something that we hope to continue for a long time because there's a lot to learn about Cedarburg. Thank you for coming.